In my company, we can fix 64 homes a week right now.
This is usually the $1 million question that people probably think about a little too early in their business.
They do about 1.4 million in flooring, and he's still the only salesperson.
Whoever controls the money has the leverage.
What is phantom equity?
Giving equity is a good way to keep key employees with your company because
Every time I've done this in all my businesses, I spend 6 months slowly transitioning.
If you can facilitate enough leads, you just immediately,
for business owners, the first thing to consider is
if you have no intention to sell in the next couple of years, you need to be thinking about that because that's going to be a reality.
we can just not have to pay the government as much money. I think that's a win for everyone.
Welcome to Beers with Contractors.
Will, what's up?
Man, I brought my flamingo shirt today. I know we talked about it a few episodes ago, but I'm feeling summer, man.
You really teased me earlier this morning. You were like, I've got a surprise for you on this episode. And here I was like, this is going to be some awesome topic. There's going to be an additional special guest. And then you show up and it's a flamingo shirt.
Are you not impressed?
No, I am impressed. It's awesome. It's a
Okay,
great
I
shirt.
was about to say, damn, I thought you'd love it.
No, I do.
I thought I was going to get paid more. I thought I was going to get a promotion. And then he shows up with a freaking flamingo shirt. Like, what the hell?
We're going to get like 100 more subs just because of this one shirt.
Yeah. Well, hey, speaking of subs, listen, I got to give a shout out to Job Van Zyl, Milton Barron, Alan Duggan, Nick 50, Martin Ridow, Leo Alarcon, Narf, and Tammy Thomas, new subscribers. So they're getting to join our previous 5 listeners this week. So that's kind of cool.
That's like well over 100% growth.
Always feel pumped to give you guys a shout out. I've actually commented on a few or replied on a few of your comments. So thanks for that. Anyway, Dylan, I've cracked mine open for another episode of Beers with Contractors. And I always forget to do that thing that teenage Minecraft influencers do. Be sure to like, subscribe. Heck, throw us a comment in there. In fact, if you are one of our contractor listeners, this is a quick reminder about our Q3 financial reviews. A lot of us around the country are getting in smaller groups of 4 to 5 companies, and we're comparing financials. It's kind of nice. My company is also represented in there, so we can cross-compare direct labor, cost of goods sold, everything down to benefits, indirect overhead, marketing spend, all that. So if you want to be a part of that, we'll do that in October, and we'll have a quarterly review of Q3. We've got a link down in the comments if you guys want to be a part of that, so submit to that, and we'll start getting you involved with Natasha, our admin here. But Dylan, we had a question thrown out just recently, and we hear this question a lot, don't we?
Let me kind of cue you up a little bit. This question is going to hit a lot of, young, entrepreneurs or people that are just starting out their business. But I imagine even the ones that have been around the block a little bit, they can relate big time with this. And we want to hear your guys' comments as well about how you kind of navigated this question. But you're just starting out, you're growing. You have an emerging company that you're starting to realize there's too many things you're juggling, right? You got your admin, maybe you're still a technician at some level and you're out in the field or at least managing, an install team, but you need to keep selling to grow, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so here, the question is simply what do I do about my first strategic hire? When does that come and who is that?
Yeah, and I think the question on our Facebook group was specifically of when do I hire my first salesperson? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's because a lot of the owners in the company are doing most of the selling for their home service business. And to be clear, and I love this guy, I'll use him as a reference, Michael Soto, we talk about him often. They do about 1.4 million in flooring, and he's still the only salesperson, but he's nearing that edge where it's like, crap, I need to look at hiring somebody else as a salesperson. What I recommend, and from my experience, I've done that and I've been in that position. It's a really tough place to be because you're essentially giving all the future potential revenue to someone else in the company. That's a lot of control, but it's a necessary step for growth. So what I have found that works best is make sure you have enough leads to facilitate if you're going to provide leads to that person, or you have enough branding awareness to where they can go self-generate. So if you don't even have enough leads for that individual to run, that's going to be a big problem. But if you have enough brand awareness and they can go out there with a t-shirt and go into referral groups, that's going to help tremendously. But try to have enough to where you can bring on 2 at the same time. That is insanely helpful because a lot of people think, well, do I need 1 or do I need 2? The reason I recommend 2, and I've done this in all of my businesses, is in the event that through the training and onboarding that doesn't work out, then the owner doesn't have to completely ditch all the new stuff and dive completely back in. So then that way there's still a part of the business propped up by one of the successful individuals. Hopefully they're both successful. When I find that everybody puts their egg in one basket of one salesperson and the owner completely detaches from sales, that's a big problem. Every time I've done this in all my businesses, I spend 6 months slowly transitioning. And Dylan, you've heard me do the Homer Simpson reference, like back in the bushes. I Homer Simpson my way out of the sales department, but I don't do it immediately. I don't abdicate. And then typically you get this momentum. One thing, and Dylan, you know a little bit about this, there's tons of pay structures for this around the country that you've seen. And I know I'm a big proponent of doing a training salary and then eventually converting into commission. But you've seen from other companies all sorts of different things, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could go full blown salary. I would advise against that for someone who's, just starting out. You kind of got to prove your worth a little bit, and keep your salespeople hungry, especially if it's your first one or two that you're hiring. You could do, something with the combination of a salary with a commission or a draw structure where they're going to get a guaranteed amount, and they could exceed that amount. Eventually the draw could go away. But I think no matter what you choose in terms of a compensation model, you need to have very clear objectives for those new salespeople. It would be really easy to just hire them in and be like, oh, they're just going to add a little bit more to what I'm already doing. But the reality is you've been at it and your name is probably attached to most of the previous sales, and they just know you as the company. So there may be, some rough patches starting out, but they need to have very clear targets, KPIs that they're hitting so that you can really measure them against it. And then, to your point, Will, I think that's awesome. If you can facilitate enough leads or have the brand awareness to bring on two people at once, you just immediately created competition in your company. And that's going to do wonders for you and obviously the best of the ones that you want to stick around. So yeah, I would totally agree with that if you have the ability.
Yeah, there's something to be said about some competitive nature, but also not cutthroat competitive. In systems of scale, just to be clear, just recently, they're in the 4th week of training. We have 7 new sales reps at my company right now that have all gone through the same training together, spread across 2 offices. And they're like a bunch of brothers and sisters. It's kind of cool. They're like the class of summer of 2024 coming into the world. They have that camaraderie built in, and it's not like, first day of school, you go in there and you don't know anybody, you're nervous, right? It's like they're coming into an already established culture with already their subculture built in. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And
I would
about
echo salespeople. Because the last episode, Zach even said, he was like, damn, I hate managing salespeople. And I do too.
Yeah. I think it's important too. I mean, if you're bringing in multiple, they can rely on each other because inevitably they're going to have questions about how do we scope this? How do we sell this? What are the processes on the software? So on and so forth. And then what happens is you've trained them both together. So one of them's going to remember, hopefully, and they'll ask each other. And so then they won't be on your case all the time. So bring them together or bring them into like, hey, here's your production department so that they can get to know those fine employees as well. And then they can ask questions straight up from the person who's going to be installing their work. That's going to be really valuable.
So you're saying they get mom brain, where it's like, I can't remember where my shoes are. And then mom's like, it's over on the, in the corner of the bedroom. That's what happens with new salespeople. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, yeah, let's be real. It happens.
Within reason. Mom brain. All right, cool. Hey, let's get to a massive topic. Man, our guest today, I'm so excited. We've been waiting for this guy. Finally was able to get him on, and he's not going to charge me for today. I'm super pumped about that. There's my first jab of the day. I'll go ahead and start a tally marker in the corner of the podcast here. But on today's episode, Beers of Contractors, I'm insanely excited to welcome Matt Jones. Matt Jones is a lawyer specializing in representing entrepreneurs. Matt is dedicated to crafting the best legal solutions for entrepreneurs and serves as general counsel for numerous early-stage startups. His clients include founders and companies, including my own, for some of the most predominant startup accelerator programs like Techstars, Capital Factory, 500 Startups, and Thunder Launchpad. Many more behind that, but we won't get into it. But beyond guiding startups, Matt also has a thriving practice representing buyers and sellers in the small to medium-sized business acquisitions, I am insanely excited to talk law, acquisitions, and investment vehicles with Matt Jones. Matt, cheers to you, buddy. Welcome. Finally.
Good to be here. Cheers.
Well, we've cracked him open. Oh, he does have one. There it is, and it's not shaken up.
Of course, I'm going to bring a beer to the beer podcast.
Hell
you
yeah.
know.
That's right. Yep. He is
We're
prepared.
just glad
so,
you didn't bring whiskey. You know, you have your decanter, I'm sure, sitting out behind you.
It's sitting right here. Yeah, we can.
Yeah. Hopefully there's no weird HR office policies there in Resolution Legal.
We're good.
But cool. Well, Matt, you have represented us, not only my construction company, but our software company, and also through our recent acquisition. So your name is liked and respected by so many people at my companies. But I also know that when we invited you a few months ago to speak at our Contractors Guild, the amount of knowledge that you gave us on contracts, you were only supposed to speak for an hour. I think you spoke for 2.5 hours. Today's podcast will not go that long, but let's start out before we get to our questions. And Dillon, I'll let you introduce the format. Just tell us a little bit about how the hell you got into law, man. I mean, what led you down this path?
Yeah, I stumbled into it. I would say it wasn't a path that I have always dreamed of. I would honestly say my path has always been towards entrepreneurship and business ownership. And in some circuitous way, I ended up fulfilling that slice of the pie through the legal profession. So honestly, I view myself first as just an advisor to startups, founders, entrepreneurs, and secondly, just as a lawyer. So this just happens to be my slice of the pie in the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Well, you're great at it. I love it because, as I mentioned to a lot of people, and I have mentioned to you, you're very good at getting the crayons out and explaining to me in a kindergarten level exactly how law works. And I'm like, okay. So that's why I think you'll be a good value to our listeners out there, all 6 of them. But Dillon, why don't you've got a unique format for today, and I really appreciated this. So let's let our listeners know the questions and the journey we're going to go through with Matt. Hey, contractors, it's Will. Listen, are you ready to take your business to the next level? I want to introduce everybody to ShipShape AI. It's an AI-powered home monitoring system that keeps your customers' homes running smoothly and gives you the edge over the competition. Imagine being the hero who spots an issue before it turns into a disaster, like a flooded basement or a busted HVAC system. ShipShape's smart sensor alerts you to the problems before they happen so you can swoop in with the solution for your customers. But it's not just about saving the day. ShipShape helps you tap into past customers with tailored marketing campaigns, turning one-time jobs into long-term relationships. Plus, you can grow your maintenance plans and get more follow-up on projects, all while offering your customers a peace of mind that they crave. And the best part, ShipShape's Pro Monitoring service handles the tech support, so you can focus on what you do best, building and maintaining and repairing homes. So in the market where the competition is fierce, now is the time to secure your customers and protect this premium pricing. Learn more at shipshape.ai or click the link in the episode description here. That's shipshape.ai. Or you can even call our friends at ShipShape at 205-207-5775. ShipShape, where smart homes meet smart contractors.
Yeah, well, I think it makes a lot of sense for our listeners to hear it chronologically. So we want to talk to Matt today about, what the whole business evolution looks like. So we're going to kind of format it where we're going to talk about starting a business, and then now you've got that business launched and you're going to grow it, and then eventually with the intention of selling it. And again, you can look back at our previous podcasts. We're big fans of you posturing to sell your business right now, even if you have no intention to sell in the next couple of years. You need to be thinking about that because at some point that's going to be a reality, and that could be an awesome reality with great outcomes for you. And then we'll probably have some just general questions along the way about legal guidance. So just starting out, Matt, let's kind of start at the top of the food chain. We're building a new business. What legal structures should contractors consider when they're starting their business, and how do they impact liability and taxes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say in the construction and contractor industry, it is infamous for folks just going out on their own as a sole proprietor and just hanging up a shingle and starting to swing some hammers and cut down things. And so, we would always recommend really an LLC, a limited liability company, is usually the way to go for, and it's a simple registration. What that does is it creates liability protection and a shield between the owner's assets personal assets in the actual business. And so if something were to go wrong, and I know in construction, things never go wrong. So we probably shouldn't even talk about this, but
Yeah, never. It never goes
no,
wrong in
no
construction.
disputes. I mean, there aren't hotheads and really prideful guys who want to get after it. An LLC will typically create that separation, that liability shield. And in terms of taxes, there could be an advantage. A lot of contractors will have their companies taxed as what's called an S corporation. It allows them to save money on self-employment taxes, which I think if we can just not have to pay the government as much money, I think that's a win for everyone. So yeah, an LLC taxed as an S corp would be the number one legal entity structure, and then from there, there's some creative paths and creative structuring opportunities as well.
Yeah. Well, and thanks for that, because so many people are so confused about the whole LLC but taxed as S corp. And, one thing you didn't mention there, because people still say this, but they say, well, what about a C corp? And I'm like, dude, home services, there's no need to go to a C corp level. But do you agree with that, Matt? I mean, it just doesn't make a lot of infrastructure sense to do that.
As a service business, absolutely. If you were a technology company, high growth, wanting to take on venture capital, that's a different
Yeah.
conversation. For your 99% of the businesses that you see in any given city, in the construction industry and otherwise, yeah, C corp does not usually make sense.
That's what I thought.
Matt,
Go ahead, Dylan.
yeah, Matt, what does the paperwork look like to start your LLC?
Yeah, you simply file articles of organization with the Secretary of State. You get a tax ID number with the IRS, and then you have an operating agreement, whether it's just you as a single owner or if you have founders or partners, that would be the governing document and governing the relationship of the owners. And with those three things, then you're off and running in terms of forming and registering and getting the company off the ground.
Now, this wasn't in our questions, Dylan, but I kind of want to pepper this in. So in the instance, like I'm a young man or woman and I'm wanting to start an in-home service business, but I'm thinking about a partnership. What should be considered there in the filings? But I think you're going to say that it mainly lives in the operating, well, I like to call it operating disagreement, but what's your take there, Matt?
Yeah, so you don't, luckily, well, I know our viewership is probably nationwide. We're in the state of Oklahoma. Many states, including Oklahoma, it's not required that you list ownership in the public filing, so that's anonymous. So to your point, yeah, you would document that in the operating disagreement, or otherwise known as the operating agreement. I know from personal experience in business disputes that it's probably better known as the disagreement, but in all honesty, it creates the roadmap for owners to resolve disputes and to get out in front of disputes and mechanisms to, address those issues that day one you're probably not worried about, but day 365, 2 years, 3 years down the road, inevitably something's going to happen, and that's the document you would look to.
Yeah, and I got to give credit where credit's due. I did not come up with that operating disagreement. I heard that from a mutual friend we have, Matt, Brian Clifton, and it's like nobody looks at it until somebody's pissed off and has a disagreement, and then it's like, well, what's in the operating agreement?
That's
and
clever.
hopefully,
Yeah, I've actually never heard that. That's pretty cool.
oh yeah, that's where I heard it. Hopefully, and I suggest anybody out there that I think a lot of folks are nervous about seeking help from attorneys like you, so they go like ChatGPT or try to download a template online, and it's like, oh my gosh, please don't do that. Like it's so worth, just going to somebody that's got some experience there. So all right, now I'm going to paint a picture for the second one. Moving on, we've established our corporation. We're good to go, Matt. Now we got to go out there and start selling work, and then, well, customers want us to do work, so we just do everything on a handshake, right? Now
Roll
we
on.
get into, all right, so contracts. So what are some key clauses and terms that contractors should ensure are included in each and every contract to protect their customers and their business?
Yeah, let me clarify on the front end. A contract can be oral, so it can actually be a handshake deal. It can be in an email. It doesn't have to say the word contractor agreement. You just need an offer and acceptance, and there needs to flow some sort of consideration or benefit to each party. And if those three elements are met, then a contract's formed. So I think a lot of people need to understand at the outset that It doesn't have to be a signed piece of paper to be a contract. In fact, I mean, I would say several contracts get formed via email or text threads. But to your point about what's important to contain in a contract, especially, in light of contractors, those in the construction or other services-based industries, I think number one always universally is just a well-defined scope of work. A contract at its basis is really just formalizing and memorializing expectations amongst two or more parties or people. So what we're trying to do is get on paper what our expectations are for a particular project or deal, and so that there's no ambiguity there. So you'll see a lot of disputes around this. If I'm just saying I'm going to go paint someone's house and leave it at that, I mean, which rooms get painted, which don't, like what color paint, what's the timeline, all that kind of stuff. So the more granular you can get, probably the better. I'd say that's number one. Number two is just timelines and deadlines. You guys are in the industry. One person needs to finish before another person can take their shot at a project, and so on and so forth. And these delays can really cause or wreak havoc in the chain of events for a particular project. So I'd say well-defined timelines is important. Indemnification is important. That's just a fancy word of saying, hey, other party, you're going to step into my shoes and defend me and hold me harmless if something bad happens. So if I do a project, 6 months down the road, someone gets injured on the project, I want assurances that they're not going to come after me just because I was doing work on the project. I'm not in a position to really dictate whether or not there were safe conditions out there or what caused the harm. And so indemnification, especially in the construction industry, is huge. And then, dealing with modifications and change orders, that comes to mind as an important topic. I have yet to see a project go from start to finish exactly as the parties mapped it out from the very beginning. And so there needs to be some sort of mechanism. And so, those come to mind.
If there's a company out there that their projects go exactly as it's supposed to, start to finish, we'll probably touch base on that on the bottom part of our questions, which is selling the business, because the valuations are probably sky high for that company.
Yeah. Right. Perfected it. They're the unicorn. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that about change orders, because your definition of what makes a contract, and we've started this episode talking about salespeople, and every 3 months I talk about this with my team, is sometimes these communications through text thread or email undo some of the language in the contract. So what are some... So I think it would be good to have a quick bullet point of what are the type of breaches of contract that most commonly happen with construction companies that we just do it naturally and don't even know. And hell, the customer, I don't think they even know they're doing it. So,
oh gosh, you hit a great point, Will. We'll just call it inadvertent modifications to a contract. I didn't mean to modify the contract, but I talked with a superintendent on the site or someone within the company. We had conversations about how we're going to do something outside the scope of the contract, and now one party expects that. And I think legally there's a good chance that contract probably was modified in that situation. It happens all the time, and I think there's not a perfect solution, but as a practical takeaway, I think for the listeners, one way to at least mitigate that risk is at the very beginning of a project to assign a point person or a point of contact who they're the ones who have the authority to bind any sort of decision, and anything that comes outside from someone else, that it's known on the front end that will not create any legally binding contract, even if the conversation would indicate otherwise.
Yeah, so they're the ones tying up that consideration / benefit on the end to make sure that everybody's on the same side for both parties.
Yeah, easier said than done though too. I mean, you know how these projects go.
Mm-hmm.
It's by the time you're in the middle of it, maybe 5 or 6 different people are talking with 5 or 6 different people of the other party, and it gets messy pretty quick.
Oh, and yeah, in my company, we can fix 64 homes a week right now, and it's like it could happen between the foreman, the person in the office scheduling or rescheduling a project, the salesperson. Heck, it could be the call center person trying to collect payment. It's wild. So when you came to speak to us about that, that was massive, and now that's why we go through this kind of language training with my company every 3 months. So thanks for that, Matt. That's awesome.
Well, Matt, so obviously this is contracts gone right, and you kind of talked about the messiness. So things can go wrong What are the most common legal mistakes contractors make when they're starting their business, and how can they avoid them?
I mean, we've already touched on it, so I won't go in too deep detail on it, but just either not having a contract or the contract being inadequate. So a lot of times contractors especially will just, for example, use an invoice and say that that's their contract. It may contain a few terms on the very bottom of it, but in reality, it's not really a contract. So, typically when we see these, it's the contractor's doing fine, and then all of a sudden now a dispute arises and they realize they didn't have a contract in place, and so they're kind of screwed out of the deal. I would say, obviously, anything related to liens is a big issue in the contractor world. You got to make sure you meet the timelines and just make sure you're on top of that. And then a practical, I don't know if this would be necessarily legal, but a practical tip is, whoever controls the money has the leverage. And so especially in construction, whichever side has physical control of the money, the money is in their bank account. They're the ones who control the narrative in the conversation oftentimes. And you can contractually position yourself to be that person. A lot of mistakes that contractors make is that they pay their guys too soon, or the payment terms in the contract are ambiguous, and they're not in a position to control and leverage that. So I think a practical tip is, and just something to remember, just whoever controls the money has the leverage.
Well, before we transition into the topics about now we've got the business, we're set up legally, we're starting to develop business. Before we get into growing your business, I wanted to mention one thing, and I can verbalize what you taught me, but I'd like to have you explain a little bit about the difference in a contract between negligence versus gross negligence and why that's important in having in a contract. Because when you told me, I was like, makes total sense.
Anyone who has dealt with the lawyer and have had red lines back and forth are familiar with the back and forth on whether we add that word gross in front of it or we just call it mere negligence. So I'm not going to get the exact legal definition right, but I'll just kind of give you guys the lay person's overview of it. So ordinary negligence is really a reasonableness standard. So what would reasonable parties expect in a situation? Would a reasonable party expect that contractor A would have done XYZ as part of the project that caused some sort of damage or not? So you're really looking at it through the lens of a reasonableness standard. Gross negligence is elevated above that. So it's reasonableness. What would a reasonable person expect in a situation? But then like the standard is raised. It's not just what would a normal reasonable person expect, but under the prudent circumstances. I mean, under the hold a gun to your head and that's what should have been done, then was it grossly negligent or not? So if you're on whatever side you're on, you obviously want the other side to be held to a negligence standard because that's lesser. And then you would want yourself to be held more to a gross negligence standard that is above the reasonableness.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, because that was super helpful. When you told me that, I changed our contract immediately. Because there are some times, hey, we backed up in the driveway, we accidentally, fell off the side of the concrete pad and busted a sprinkler. What happened is it's like, oh, well, our guys were negligent, so I'm not paying you. And when you say that's where it's like, well, what's gross negligence? So that was my example, but can you give a more specific example there, Matt, that you have seen in your experience? Because I know you get to see a lot of crazy stuff.
You know what? Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'm not dealing with a lot of disputes, so we're trying to prevent the disputes. I'm the transactional guy, and then once someone commits negligence or gross negligence, then I send them down the hall to the litigation guys. But maybe an analogy might be helpful. I think in terms of negligence and gross negligence, just your marriage, for example. I think as husbands, we're often negligent in our marriage. We do stupid things. But they don't rise to the level of your wife wanting to leave you. But then, so that's what I would view as negligence, is the stupid things that husbands do a lot of times that piss their wives off. Gross negligence.
Actually, no. Let's keep talking about that, because I'm in that category and I want to get as much free legal advice from you without being billed. There's my second jab today. No, I'm kidding, man.
Well, we
Continue.
know we know you're an idiot in your marriage every now and then. I mean, Dylan, I don't know if you're married. If you are,
Actually,
then
Dylan's way better than
Yep,
me, but
yep.
Dylan
I-
can confirm.
I'm an idiot, but usually it results in us getting called out and having to sleep on the couch for one night, and then it's all good. If we committed, that's ordinary negligence, and it just happens. A lot of times, it's just part of the fabric of life. And then a gross negligence in a marriage would be, something that would probably warrant, marriage counseling, divorce, and so forth. So if you can look at it in terms of that, where a negligence is going to happen and it's going to be uncomfortable, but we can prevent it in a construction context. Gross negligence is that standard where it's like, all right, there was something probably a little willful, or you should have known about it, something a little nefarious.
Well, now I'm glad to know that when we chop this up into short form, we'll probably get some engagement about marriage counseling, marital dispute. That's great.
Yeah, Matt, I love beers with contractors just came beers with husbands. So
Right. Like,
It's
is
very
this
relatable.
negligent? I mean, is drinking beer on the job while we're talking shop? I mean, is that negligent? I don't know.
Ooh,
To be
interesting,
determined.
interesting.
Yeah, that's
We don't
pretty
want any
wild.
accidents to happen right now as we're drinking and on the pod. But Matt, I'm going to transition. So we just talked about, just starting out the business. Now we're going to move into a couple questions around just growing the business. So you're trying to grow your business, and as a contractor scales, how should they approach bringing on partners or investors to fuel that growth?
This is usually the $1 million question that people probably think about a little too early in their business, because it sounds sexy. I want to raise money, grow. But for the few who are successful and it makes sense to start growing, I mean, you've got to first figure out, the mechanism. Is it going to be with a traditional lender in debt? Is it going to be a true by my side partner who's going to be with me in the day to day? Is it going to be an investor who's passive? So I think for business owners, the first thing to consider is the level of involvement that you want the financing source to be in your company. If you're wanting to bring strategic folks on that can help in intangible ways, that not just with the money, then that's one situation. If you're looking for just bank financing where you just pay it back, they don't own any equity in the business, figuring out how you want that relationship to look, I think at the outset is probably the first thing that any business owner should.
So I'd like to flip that, Matt. So let's say like a few, I say this politely, a few of our listeners and myself, we're in a different position where I want to stay in my lane and I only want to work with home service companies. So I'm approached by several home service companies that are like a concrete company or a fencing company that says, hey, would you consider partnering with us as a financial partner? What would you suggest for me? Now I'm on the other side looking at acquiring that business and what to consider. And I know that could be a really broad answer, but it just hit me.
Well, I think first of all, I would assess the viability and likelihood that you're able to mesh your existing company operations with their operations. Maybe not fully, but as you know, there's a lot that goes into acquiring a company or selling a company, and determining the synergy and the operation side of things is going to make your life. I mean, it's going to be the deciding factor of whether this is a nightmare situation or if it's a good handoff and transition. So, and there's a lot that goes in there, but figuring out that operational synergy and whether it makes sense.
Well, I know I went from one end of the spectrum of Dylan's question and then to the other end with mine. But I know that there's a lot of folks that talk about this where whether or not to give equity to some of their employees or phantom equity. I think maybe it's wise to define those two for us and then explain pros and cons of each.
Yep. A lot of folks, when they're growing a business, it makes sense at some point in the life cycle of the business to start offering equity or equity-like features to their employees. The main reasons you would do that, one is just to incentivize employees to grow the company alongside you so that they get a stake in the growth. So if an employee is just a W-2 employee taking home a paycheck and they have no stake in the growth of the company, at some point they're likely to check out, at least to some degree. If you give them a little stake in the upside and in the growth, and at least in theory, that should incentivize them to look out for the growth and the benefit of the company. So that's one. Employee retention would be another one. Giving equity is a good way to keep key employees with your company, because now the opportunity cost for them to leave is that they have to typically give up the equity that they otherwise would have had.
Yeah. Well, I think this actually, this question, by the way, Matt, this is super helpful. One of the reasons my first business, I was in this exact situation where I had perceived equity for all my hard ass work growing it, but in reality, I had no equity. I guess I didn't have terms and considerations to this with my partner. So if you're an owner and you want to give, say, for example, equity or phantom equity, or I'm a potential employee that's approaching this possibility, what are the best ways to kind of get that ironed out and documented? You know, I'm assuming you create an employment contract that's tied into it, but what would you recommend to people for that?
Yeah, well, at least on the business owner company side of things, then the easiest first step is to establish just some sort of equity incentive plan. It'll be the governing document that governs how the company intends to distribute out equity to employees. It doesn't obligate them to, it just kind of sets forth the rules and how it's going to look. So that would be step number one. And then step number two would be to, start determining what type of equity or equity-like mechanisms you're wanting to grant, whether it be phantom, whether it be true equity. And then you start thinking through things like, do I want my employees to have a seat at the table and have a vote on company matters? Or maybe yes, but no. So which matters should they have a vote on? Which do they not? Then you start thinking through vesting. You know, should they have to earn that equity over time, which makes sense for a lot of folks? Or have they been with the company for 25 years and now this is more of a sign of appreciation as well as wanting to keep them, and so maybe they don't. It's not justified to subject that to vesting. So those are just a few of the and then what happens when the employment terminates? I mean, do they get to retain a portion of it? Does the company have to buy it back? Or is it just automatically forfeited for $0 and they walk away with nothing? So, I wouldn't say that typically that's a subject of intense negotiation. Usually the employer just presents the offer and it's a take it or leave it. But there might be situations, and especially in like kind of key executive roles, where employees would have a little bit of negotiating leverage, especially if they're a key person where the business owner knows they could really go wherever they want and leave if they wanted to.
Yeah.
Matt, I got to ask you, I'm asking for a friend. I definitely know the answer to this question, but I'm asking for a friend. What is phantom equity?
I know.
Yeah, it's
is
like
it real?
Ooh,
Phantom
it's like
equity. It's phantom.
Yeah, it's you can't see it. It's just in the ether and it just out there.
I can't believe we said ether in unison. That was perfect.
Yes,
because essentially it is exactly that. But I want to hear.
It has equity-like features without being equity. So I know that's going to confuse a lot of people, but so you're granting employees essentially a contract that says when the company sells or on a quarterly basis, we'll give you, payments of profits for this amount. It's a contract between the employee and the company that that the company's success will generate some sort of distribution or compensation to the employee. But they're not an actual employee or an actual shareholder or member. They don't have the right, they don't have the legal protections that a member or shareholder would have. So it's simply just a contract that makes it look like they have usually financial rights similar to if you were a member or shareholder of the company. But it's phantom, it's ghost-like. So it doesn't really exist as equity, but it looks like it.
Spooky. Awesome. I love it. I want to continue on this train though, Matt. So we've talked about like we're growing the business, we're going, hopefully everything's going positive, but inevitably something again will go wrong and you have to seek legal counsel. What's one thing business owners often fail to ask for legal counsel on that ends up costing them big?
There's just a few things top of mind because we're dealing with them right now. But I would just say anytime a dispute is brewing or it's in the early stages of a dispute, and I'm not talking about like an obvious, like a lawsuit's going to get filed, but it's starting to look like we're going to have to figure this out. Looping in the attorney early on is huge in the sense that it allows them, one, to start getting familiar with what's going on and the context behind it. Because at the end of the day, especially in the construction and contractor world, a lot of it's a he said, she said, going back through emails and text messages. If the lawyer gets brought in way down the line, there's going to be some things that are missed. And so the lawyer can, get up to speed early on. And then secondly, they're just able to offer prudent, sound advice because inevitably, really probably both sides are going to do or say something they shouldn't have that's going to come back and bite them down the road. So I'd say number one is just loop them in early. Most good attorneys are not going to really rack up a huge invoice or bill for these.
Hey, whoa. Easy.
That's the
I
job.
paid some of your bills, Matt. I'm
Yeah?
just kidding. That's my third strike. Actually, I have never cut a check to you that I've regretted cutting, Matt. I'm just kidding. I mean, I love you to death. So
So you're
I
just
had to
kidding
take a
that
jab.
you did regret or you did not regret it?
No, I did not. I did not regret it. So
Well, it is just an issue. I mean, to get the elephant out of the room, I mean, lawyers tend to be expensive and business owners don't like to spend money on legal. So we got to figure out the middle ground there.
isn't that such a dichotomy, though? It's like, hey, I want to be paid for my services to your house, but I hate to pay the attorney for providing services to keeping my ass out of court.
Right. When you're in jail, I think you would have wished that you would have put a little bit of money there. So
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think mentioned this a little bit in a few past episodes. I think a lot of smaller contractors are reluctant to approach an attorney because they're fearful of being told all the stuff that they're doing legally wrong. Kind of like, oh, man, I don't want to check that credit score. Otherwise, it could be bad. But man, it's just one of those people like you, Matt, have brought so much relief in helping sleep at night. Goodness gracious. That alone just helps tremendously. So let me segue a little bit. Of course, you start a business, you grow the business, and then all your legal problems go away, right? No, they don't. They're scalable just like anything else. But, and I love this because we're starting to see this in the home services business just all over the place right now, where owners are selling their businesses. And we're not just talking about boomers that don't have succession plans. We have very young millennial, Gen Xers, and boomers. We've got some Zennials building up businesses. Hell, my son built up a in-ground trampoline business and sold it, and he's 19. And so, like, now that we're looking at the opportunity that could be in the home services business for contractors looking to sell, what are some of the key legal steps that they need to make sure before they take that final step?
yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful for contractors and home service providers that to understand, the process, so then they can, reverse engineer and make sure that they're in a position to be able to sell. So, I mean, step one is when you're going to market or you're starting to field inquiries, then at some point there's a come to Jesus moment where they're going to ask to set up a data room, and you're going to have to shoot over all the financials. You're going to have to shoot over all your contracts, material customers, suppliers, employee issues, all that kind of stuff. And so if that house isn't in order, then you're going to scare away. I mean, if you're selling your house, would you let the kids go run through it and then go talk and say, oh yeah, come in and take a look at it? So it's similar with the business. I mean, you got a lot of little kids running around in your business creating messes that you need to clean up before a potential buyer sees those.
Yeah, and that's actually interesting because we talked a little bit about NDAs before entering into those conversations. So obviously there's even kind of a flirtation of possibly selling or purchasing said business, but at what point does it eventually transition to saying, hey, we need to sign an NDA or progress to an LOI? And what the hell did those initials stand for, Matt?
I'm glad you made that point. So step one is just get your house in order behind the scenes, and don't let anyone break into your house and get under the hood except for employees and the owners. Step two then is that we would probably, present an NDA to anyone interested in learning more about the business, even if whether they're getting under the hood of the business or not. An NDA is a confidentiality agreement. It's a non-disclosure agreement. It binds each party from and prohibits them from disclosing any sort of proprietary or confidential information of the company that is disclosing it to them. So it ensures that, hey, I have to give you sensitive information for you to even assess whether you want to go through with this deal or not. But I don't want you to walk away and then go to my competitor and then tell them that Will and Dillon's company actually operates at a $10 million loss and they made no money last year, which wouldn't be true.
Hey, change the names, Matt, please.
Yeah. I'm just trying to present real life situations that are likely to happen. And so that was
shots fired.
Just kidding. Your guys' loss is probably closer to 5, not 10.
Hey, you're getting
$5, not $5 million.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, we're going to need an NDA from you, Matt, if you want to discuss this any further on the podcast.
That's
okay.
right.
All right, here we'll I'll shoot one over. It'll be my form though, and it'll be unilateral. So, but okay, so NDA definitely, if you're going to disclose information, confidential, proprietary, or just engage in conversation, I would be prudent. Want to protect confidential information. Then next, you alluded to an LOI, which stands for a letter of intent. Some folks refer to it as an MOU or memorandum of understanding or a term sheet. Essentially, a 1, 2, 3 pager that's going to set forth indications of interest that, hey, yeah, we've gone on our first date, we've gone on a second date, maybe we need to for this thing up. We're getting serious. Let's start getting terms, purchase price, transition expectations, employees. Let's get like the main 10 or 12 terms down where if we can't come to an agreement on these terms, we're probably going to walk away and there's not going to be a deal. So before engaging the lawyer to draft the 70,000 page the purchase agreement, let's just get these terms ironed out, and we can come to terms on these. Then I think we have a good shot at a deal.
Yeah. So to put this in order of operation, and sorry, Dylan, I know you have a question. It would be NDA, then we can present some of the house in order financials. Then it goes to an LOI. Is that safe to say, Matt, an abbreviated version?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, every deal is different. It doesn't have to be in that order. I would say the order should always contain an NDA first. How the transaction goes after that can go a myriad of different ways. The important thing though is you're getting your confidential information protected, and then you guys are not just talking through terms, because there will be that, and maybe we should have mentioned that on the front end. I think the process looks more like NDA, let's shoot 7,000 emails back and forth and have 50 phone calls talking through things. Oh, okay, now we talked about a lot of stuff. Now let's go to an LOI and actually get what we talked about on paper. And then we start talking through those terms. Then we sign the LOI. We think we're going to go through with the sale, engage the lawyers to talk to one another, and start drafting the definitive purchase agreements. And probably the lawyer's going to want to do some legal due diligence on the potential target company. And then usually from there, the lawyers will kind of shoulder the weight to steward the transaction. So the business owner doesn't necessarily need to guide everyone. I mean, you're still running your business. The last thing you want to do is focus 100% on this transaction. So the lawyer will step in and help guide that.
Awesome.
And you'll pay them a lot of money.
Hey, you'll pay them their worth if they're good.
Yes,
to be clear.
Good, yeah.
I don't want to be the negative Nancy here, Matt, but I feel like every stage that we've gone on this chronological journey of having a company, I'm asking the question of like, well, what happens when it goes wrong, or what should you avoid?
I know you're like Debbie Downer on SNL.
I know.
I'll have to put a
glass.
sound effect.
I'm in a bad mood now, Dylan. You made us all in a bad mood.
I know.
Hey, he's setting his terms up front.
That's right. Some gross negligence on my part. Matt, I got to ask, what are the most common pitfalls you see in acquisition deals for contractors, and how can they be avoided?
So pitfalls on the front end before the sale, or pitfalls on the back end after the sale?
If you cover both, we'd love to hear both.
Okay. So common pitfalls on the front end of a deal, merger and acquisition deal. Most common would be the seller of the business is not being fully transparent and disclosing everything right away. And then we get to the 11th hour and certain things are uncovered, and then the deal either blows up or heavy negotiations start bringing the deal terms down more favorable to the buyer than to the seller. So that on the seller side of things, make sure, that's why at the very beginning I said, get your financial house in order, get your documents in order. You need to present the accurate portrayal of the company because these buyers are sophisticated. They're going to look through it. They're going to get under the hood. They're going to look at documents more in depth than you probably would think they would. And they're going to uncover some things. So I think that at least pre-acquisition, that's a pitfall that a lot of folks fall into. I think post-acquisition, not really negotiating well how the transition is going to look. So in acquisitions, oftentimes the key personnel or the owners are going to stick in or be in a position to help the buyer and the new business owner transition, because there's going to be questions that come up inevitably. And what happens when this customer calls, or I didn't know about this, or what about this technology system of the company? Can you tell me how to, the rep I need to talk to, and that, things like that the business owner knows, but the acquirer doesn't. And if clear expectations are not had on that end of it, then the buyer or seller or both of them oftentimes are going to be in a point of frustration. And the last thing you want when you acquire a new company is to have to go through that type of frustration when you have like a million other things you should be thinking about.
Yeah, and along those pitfalls, man, I know a lot of folks, they get it when they reach this point, which first off, if you're getting to this point in your business, I think it's a great thing. Unfortunately, there are certain circumstances where people are having to sell their business due to emergency or lack of succession. But I think we see a lot of in the home services world where people are proposed an earnout from a buyer. And what are the pros and cons of an earnout versus a straight equity buyout?
Yeah, so an earnout, I mean, there's several variations of it, but by and large, an earnout is where certain metrics are agreed upon from the buyer and the seller, and then post-closing, if those metrics are hit, then the seller will get certain rewards, whether that be the purchase price will increase or more stock in the company, et cetera. So what this does is for a buyer, it incentivizes the seller to stay on and make sure that this company is growing even after they leave, because obviously they want, the seller's been growing it all these years up to this point. They're in the best position still to ensure growth. And so it's a way to incentivize the seller to stay on and help with that. I think a pitfall there, especially for the seller, is oftentimes like they'll tie a greater than necessary portion of the purchase price to the earnout, as opposed to just stroking a check for a higher amount. And then because the earnout's not guaranteed, if the metrics aren't hit or they're unattainable, then the seller's walking away with a little bit less than they otherwise would have.
Yeah, so a quick true false, like my brain is wired to think that an earnout is a form of seller financing. Am I right or wrong there?
I don't think it's apples to apples, but I think there's elements of that, certainly.
Okay.
I mean, seller financing is a successful tool and mechanism that I would say a decent portion of sellers and buyers do use seller financing. But I don't think there's no incentive aligning in seller financing. I mean, seller financing is just a loan and a payback. I mean, it's simple. I mean, there's no incentive for the lender in this situation, the seller, to help with the growth or to stay in the business.
Cool. And one far from left field, I know Dylan's looking our job or our post questions, our show questions that we prep for. And it's like, why the hell do we even prep, Will? You're just going to go all over in the left field.
That's right.
So I know I'm going to go way out in left field here. But let's say it's an owner that wants to give the employees to the company give the company to the employees in the form of an ESOP. What the hell does that look like? And what are pros and cons of an employee-owned company like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of business owners, especially those who are passionate about building an actual company and a company culture and a legacy business, they're the ones thinking about ESOPs, which are employee stock option plans. I just want to grow this and then sell it off type of owners. I don't think ESOPs are really high concern for those types of folks. But yeah, I mean, it provides this sense of legacy and camaraderie amongst everyone, knowing that it's becoming employee owned, and in those situations, as opposed to maybe just mere equity grants or stock option grants, when it's a true ESOP and the owners are selling the company to the employees, there's this level of involvement and skin in the game that these employees have. So I think historically you do see a lot of buy-in and loyalty. I think that's probably one of the main things. And then some owners use it as a way to get liquidity for themselves out of the business, while still preserving what they envision and what they want with the culture and the long-term prospects of the company.
Yeah, but to be clear, that typically probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, that wouldn't be like a full buyout scenario. That would be earned over time and add cash flow to the now seller of the company as the employees are slowly taking that stock option and fulfilling it. Is that right? Did I screw that up?
That's the most traditional route.
Okay.
But you can go, I mean, you can get pretty creative and how quickly you want to go with it, or how much you want to give away. So, but how you described it is definitely the standard.
Gotcha.
Matt, I want to ask a little bit about, so you're selling the company and talk a little bit about investment vehicles, especially the purchase of real estate or equipment. Can you just talk to us, how does real estate play a part in selling a company? Are there ways contractors can protect themselves by separating real estate from the business? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, real estate's going to be a component of the business, or a component of the sale of a business, whether it's on the having to assume a lease or if they own the building, whether or not the real estate stays with it or not.
Mm.
So oftentimes, especially in the construction industry, the seller wants to keep the real estate and just get that mailbox check every month and then just lease it back to the buyer. So that's pretty common. But I think high level, to your point, Dylan, I think that separating out the assets into various special purpose entities a lot of times makes sense for companies of a certain size, just so that you're separating out different elements and asset classes that could pose different threats that you don't want to jeopardize the entire business but it's just unique to that one asset. So real estate's a good example. I mean, there's a thousand things that can happen. If something does happen to the real estate, it would be nice for the plaintiff in that situation to not be able to come into the operations side of the company to satisfy any judgment that happened on the real estate. And then vice versa, where if something happens inside your company, it would be nice to not have the real estate necessarily on the balance sheet as part of any sort of judgment or payback, our ability to pay back any sort of creditor. So
that's awesome. I learned something for sure right there. I didn't really think about the ways that could structure, and then you kind of just stay active and have that real estate mailbox money coming in. Super cool. I want to switch gears here. I know we're coming to the end of our episode. We just have a couple questions left for you, Matt. I just want to ask a really general question and it not be a negative Nancy. All right.
Hey, Dylan, I got to stop you for a second. In 2 seconds, we trip over an hour. There we went. And now we're being billed for the second hour. So thanks for that.
Yep. This is a double episode.
All right. There's the fourth jab.
Let's keep this thing going. What's your address, by the way?
Yeah, Matt's happy. Matt's happy.
Joe, I love you, Matt. Go ahead. Continue, Dylan. I'm sorry I did that to you. I froze you.
No worries. So just general legal guidance here. For contractors who are already established, what's your advice on maintaining the compliance with local and federal laws as they grow?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Dylan. Without just giving the obvious answer of just hire a lawyer and ask them to and loop them into your company and hire them for these things. I've seen a lot of companies have success in designating an employee to serve as, the de facto compliance person in a company. That maybe not be their role. That's not their title. That's not the 100% of their role, but it's their responsibility to, coordinate with the lawyer if they have questions, or just to keep an eye out and educate themselves on the different laws and regulations in a particular industry. And it's a an easy way to not have to ask the lawyer every single question, but it also, being a lawyer, when I'm coordinating with these liaisons and representatives of these companies who have that compliance responsibility, we develop rapport and we can just be more efficient and beneficial to one another. So I think that's one practical thing is just, and I know not all businesses are in a position to be able to offload that particular rule on anyone. But if you are, I've seen that be successful in a lot of small companies.
I'm glad to hear that because we've done that in certain iterations, and it was just kind of like we thought that somebody should own it. And glad to hear that confirmed from you, Matt. So now we are approaching the final part of our episode. We always go over this. It's kind of like the hottest flavor on the Hot Wings show, where it's like most people know me as a patron saint of screwing things up, and I like to screw it up so bad I can brag about it. So, Matt, what's a big screw up you made in your career that hopefully you could share with some of the listeners that hopefully you can brag about and they'd learn something from it?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to brag about it, maybe someday, but as a lawyer, my job is to
There's our
advise-
show, everybody. I'm
As a
kidding. Go
lawyer-
ahead.
Well, specifically a transactional business lawyer, my job is to advise clients and solidifying partnerships and operating agreements and making sure that partners are legally protected and so forth. But wouldn't you know that I've had a business partnership before and the lawyer didn't even have an operating agreement to govern our business, and we had a falling out and a business divorce, and it would have been nice to have an operating agreement to look to, but of course the lawyers, we thought we knew that we didn't need to have one, and that in multiple ways has come back to probably by both sides of the business divorce. So even your lawyers they need to be kicked every now and then and to take their own advice.
Yeah.
Do as
good for
I
you
say
for.
and not as I do. Wow.
I know.
I know I'm embarrassed to even have to say it, but yeah, we are where we're at. So
For sure.
Well, hey, I'm glad you admitted that. It makes you
Yeah.
wonder, I'm sure Jay-Z and Beyonce have a prenup, right? I don't know.
right. Well, I mean, in your case, if I'm hiring a contractor, but the contractor's never hammered a nail into a piece of wood,
Yep.
Right.
That was reference to Dillon. He's not a very good contractor. He actually comes from the electrical field, so
I don't know how to hammer a nail. It's, all screws.
Anyway, Matt, I know I've taken a few jabs. Hopefully, Drake is keeping tallies on the screen somewhere. But all of that comes with a massive amount of respect for who you are and what you do. You have brought so much knowledge to me, and I know you're providing value to everybody that's listening. We're up from 6 to 10 after my list today. You don't typically handle mediation, litigation, things like that. You're handling the transactional basis, mergers and acquisitions, things like that. So how does someone get a hold of you if they want to learn more?
Yeah, I'd say number one is I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So just shoot me a LinkedIn message would be an easy way to grow a connection. But then also, shoot me an email. You guys can probably provide information and some show notes or otherwise. But yeah, pretty responsive in email. But I think publicly, LinkedIn is probably the best place to go.
Yeah, and Matt, are you okay with me putting your email in the show notes for this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I would love that because, man, you can bring so much value. And I only expect 10% of the fees, obviously. Hey, before we close up, the whole Tony Soprano rule, I don't know if you know of this, where his wife wanted a divorce, so he just went and got counsel from all the other attorneys in town. So when she went to go get a divorce attorney, it was a conflict of interest. Can that really happen?
Genius move. Theoretically it could. Practically speaking, probably not, but because the attorneys would have to retain, or he would have to have retained those law firms.
Okay.
And most attorneys require some sort of retainer, so that practically wouldn't have been a prudent thing. But there's some local big money guys around town who have used several lawyers, and that's part of their strategy. So,
little bonus question for the show today.
Fascinating.
Well, hey, folks out there, listen, Matt, thank you so much. Dillon, thanks for dealing with my craziness on our show questions document here. I know
Glad
I've
that,
been
Matt.
painting it with all sorts of graffiti. To you folks out there, I appreciate you guys. We look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of Beers with Contractors. See you guys next week.
Cheers, guys.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beers with Contractors. We hope you enjoyed our chat as much as we did. Before we say our final goodbyes, a friendly reminder. Beers with Contractors encourages responsible drinking. If you choose to enjoy a beverage during our time together, please do so in moderation and only if you're of legal drinking age in your country or state. Furthermore, the advice and insights shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only. Always consult with professionals and experts in your field, and be sure to follow local laws and regulations regarding licensing and permits. We're here to help, entertain, and inspire, but your safety and compliance are important. So, as you head out into the world of construction and contracting, remember to build responsibly and make decisions that stand the test of time. Thanks for joining us today. We'll catch you on the next episode of Beers with Contractors. Until then, cheers to your success.